Hello and welcome to the Form is Temporary podcast, season 2. And yeah, we're back again, back for more FPL fun and back for a second season of the podcast. It's good to be back. My name is Roberto, FPL Yellow Army, and I've got my co-host Chris. How are you today, Chris?
I'm very good, thank you, Roberto. Yeah, it's great to be back for a new season. There's a lot of excitement really with all the changes in the FPL systems that I'm sure we'll go through in this episode. So yeah, it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to kind of run through, the podcast. If you don't already know, on Spotify, the Form is Temporary podcast. We had a good first season and we've come back for more. And on Twitter, you can follow us at tfit_pod. We're going to run through how you can join our mini league for the podcast. We do a head-to-head league. So that'll be good fun. We're also going to go, as you said, into the rule changes for FPL that have come in recently, look through some of the prices and our thoughts on that. And we're going to kind of look through some of your drafts that we've got sent in and see what the kind of strengths and weaknesses are of some of those teams. But yeah, as you say, it's like any season. It's always exciting in the build up to it. And we can see kind of how our thoughts are shaping into this season. It could be a season like no other. So I think we'll start off by kind of introducing, as a Watford fan myself, FPL has not really featured much of my thoughts on Watford players, unfortunately, the last few years. But I've had a few seasons now playing the game. My first FPL season was in 18-19. And since then, I'm quite a casual player in respects to I don't look at a lot of stats and XG and stuff. I make transfers based off, the eye test and gut feeling, because that's the way I find playing the game to be fun. But, there's no right way of playing it. I've really kind of enjoyed producing content in general on the FPL community with Twitter and the stuff with FPL Juice that I've done has really helped with that. So I'm always grateful towards the guys there for that and kind of helping out with that. But I don't know about you, Chris, in terms of your kind of style of management. Would you say you're because I feel like I'm quite a differential hunter with certain players, and I like to be conservative with most things, but pick out a few differentials. Do you have any certain styles of play that you go towards?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like to think that I can have courageous moments in and amongst all the kind of conservative play, the rank protecting transfers. I mean, I think last season there were a lot of stages where there were a lot of teams that were very similar, and it does make it fun, like you said, to bring in those differentials, and especially when you're in mini leagues with your friends and things like that, those differentials can really kind of make the difference between what rank you get. So yeah, I'd say I'm definitely a casual player, but having done the podcast for the last year, I think I've kind of I think my strategy hopefully has improved somewhat by having all the great guests we had on last year, and thank you to them again for coming on, because they really provided some amazing insights into kind of not just the kind of football side of things, but also the mental side of fantasy football. There's a lot of kind of to-ing and fro-in, and you kind of second guessing yourself a lot of the time. So yeah, it's going to be interesting this year, especially with all the changes as you mentioned. So looking forward to it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you make a very good point. I think last season as well, in particular, was a season that was very strong season for the template, and it meant that finding those differentials was a lot harder. So hopefully this season, with the way the game has been changed, and I think for the better, both for the casuals and for the more engaged managers, I think it's perfect the changes that FPL were made, with the roll over 5 free transfers, because I think ultimately with a lot of the times last season and in previous seasons when you got 1 free transfer going into any game week, you can roll an additional one to make it 2, and then that's where you'd cap it. And often you'd see some people have 2 free transfers or 1 free transfer and just make a transfer for the sake of it so that they don't burn a transfer and waste it. But now it feels like for the FPL managers out there who like to plan and who have kind of more strategy in their play, they can actually think, okay, let's be patient for about 4 or 5 weeks, build up some transfers. Now, the problem is that it's unlikely for a lot of people, I think, that we'll find a position where we don't have anything to do with our teams. You know, injuries can come into it. And, you know, sometimes some managers are just they like to scratch that itch, and they don't want to leave it how it is. So it's a nice kind of change in theory if everything goes to plan. But, you know, with FPL, we know often things can't. But if you do have these changes, it does just help the casual manager as well, because if they log into their team and, you know, miss a few weeks, you know, go on holiday, whatever, and then they come back to their team after 4 or 5 weeks, they've not made any transfers. In the past, that would mean they'd be way behind and they wouldn't be able to catch up. But now they'll have, you know, 5 free transfers potentially. So I think it's really nice that it helps those that like to be patient and plan, but it also helps those that, you know, don't have necessarily the same engagement as other managers, right?
Yeah, no, I think like you say, it's better all around for casuals and kind of the more patient players who like to plan. I think it should boost the competitiveness of FPL as well, having more players who are kind of competing at the top of the standings. So yeah, no, I think it's a really good move by FPL. And correct me if I'm wrong, Roberto, but if it with the chips as well, the transfers roll over even if you use a chip as well. So
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, and I think that having that 5 transfers does offer a lot of flexibility for managers.
Yeah, and it's quite nice in a way, because it feels like you can kind of, if you save a few transfers going into when you play your chips, you can almost like do a mini wild card. So if you had, say, you know, 3 or 4 transfers banked up, you rolled another to get 5 free transfers, then you hit the wild card in a kind of week where you felt like the fixture swings were, you know, worth going for something different and changing up your squad a bit, to then know that after that wild card you'd have 5 free transfers to kind of either fix any problems or address any other fixture swings. You can kind of play that wild card a lot more differently to you know, in the past, where you'd, you know, kind of had to commit to long-term picks and try and not be reckless with that wild card. You can kind of take more risk with that wild card, knowing you have transfers if you've banked them up. And so it does, yeah, really change the way that we can, you know, work in our chip strategy. And I think it's a really nice kind of change. Because
do you think it's, sorry to interrupt, do you think it places less importance on the wild card this season?
Yeah, there is that for sure, because I think, I mean, a lot of managers might struggle, as I said, to bank up that many transfers, but for those that do, and that you know, those that are patient in their play, it will mean that more changes all at once. So 5 transfers in one game week with those frees can almost take away the kind of jeopardy of a wild card, as you say, because you pick these players and you think, oh, I'm going to commit to them. You don't want to have to change it for, say, 8 game weeks, 9 game weeks of the wild card. We've only got 2 of them across the whole season, so you kind of don't want to use it too early. But, you know, I've seen a lot of people say, you know, with the way that the fixtures are looking and with the banking of transfers, you could just wild card now really early, because you know you can just get out of it with those free transfers you bank up. So I think it does take away a lot of the kind of restricted feel of a wild card, but it does also mean you've got the option to not use those 5 free transfers if you still want to play that kind of more aggressive play. I think what it does mean is when it comes to taking hits, we'll see a lot less of that. And it's almost going to be, I think, a bit frowned upon, people taking hits now. Whereas in the past, you know, you'd say, oh, with certain game weeks where there's a few errors, you know, in your team you need to correct, and a few fixtures you're, you know, feeling will pay back those hits, it feels very unlikely that we're going to get to a stage where taking a hit with the, you know, free transfers banked up in mind is going to be worth it. Do you agree with that?
No, I agree 100%. I think it's going to take a lot more kind of strategy in terms of how you use those transfers to your advantage. And I think especially early in the season, it's going to be interesting how managers kind of use that added flexibility, because it's a lot different, like you said earlier, about having from potentially 5 free transfers to what it was last year in maximum 2. So yeah, it's a big difference and probably will take a bit of adjusting to.
Yeah, it will. I think it is going to be one of those things that we don't really know how well it happens until the season's done and we can kind of step back and see the bigger picture. But yeah, from a kind of gameplay perspective, it is really exciting because at the end of the day, official FPL haven't made changes for, at least 8-9 years now. Basically since they changed the all-out attack chip into the free hit chip, we've not seen a lot of changes to the way the game has kind of structurally been playable. So I think the fact that there is a change is really exciting. It's just hope that it's one that does kind of increase the diversity, and it does mean, I think, that, as you say, with those kind of casuals being still having a route into the game, that hopefully we should see a lot of different teams because the engagement hopefully will be up and we'll see a lot of different styles of play. There's lots of ways that you can play this. There isn't one kind of optimal way of using these 5 free transfers. So I think it's exciting to hopefully make the teams that we see different and the strategies kind of all different converging together. It's not going to be hopefully too samey like in previous seasons.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely, like I said earlier, I think it will boost the competitiveness of FPL by, like you say, having those kind of similar teams. Less similar teams. It's just going to be more fun, I hope, as well. Especially as the season progresses. Sometimes in previous season, it has felt like it's stagnated as teams have converged. But hopefully with these changes, that can eliminate that kind of stagnation.
Yeah, and it definitely will have an impact, I think, on chip strategy. Because when you think about sometimes in the past where you'd wild card, get ready to use a bench boost quite soon after, now you can kind of do it where you've got free transfers banked up and you can kind of then reallocate funds, for instance, from your bench into your starting 11 after you've used the bench boost. And then it makes it easier to kind of navigate through game weeks. The only thing I would say is obviously with the changes to the kind of football calendar, because of the FA Cup quarterfinals, now taking place on a weekend in late March when there's, no Premier League matches taking place, there's less, chance of double game weeks and blank game weeks than in previous seasons. So it will mean, I think, that we're going to have fewer double game weeks and blank game weeks. And that's why a lot of people have talked about in game week 1, possible get bench boost out of the way. Let's see if we can play it in that game week. I'm always one that I like to keep it just so we know more information later down the line. But I think it's definitely interesting how, it's going to play into our strategy, but also it's hindered by the fact that, with the schedule changing, perhaps there'll be less doubles to kind of factor this into our transfers, I suppose. That's one of the changes. The other thing which I'm interested to get your view on, they've made some very small changes. So firstly, to point scoring with goalkeepers. If goalkeepers score a goal, it's increased in points from 6 to 10. Do you think that's really worthwhile? Because, there's only been ever 6 goalkeepers in Premier League history who've scored a goal, right? So it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it's an interesting one for sure. It doesn't seem like it's really worthwhile, but you never know. I mean, so many goalkeepers now are so comfortable with their feet and kind of long distribution. You never know. And I mean, that the goal from Alisson a few seasons ago, the header, it could just randomly happen. So you never know, really. It's interesting though, just in general, kind of the bonus point system. How it seems like there's more kind of onus on rewarding defenders with the changes. So, and kind of goalkeepers, defenders. So it's different for sure. I wonder what you thought about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, having a look at the BPS, it's interesting because you can look at it in 2 ways, really. On the one hand, like when it comes to goalkeepers, obviously getting more points for a goal than a defender, I think is the right way. I think it should have always been that. But with the BPS system, in the past, if you had, say, a Trent Alexander-Arnold or a Kieran Trippier, and they were really, really active in the game with a lot of completed passes, a lot of crosses into the box, and then they got the odd assist all there, but then they conceded, you'd see them get a lot of bonus points because of what they do within a game. But I think with this new bonus point system, it's actually penalising a lot of the goalkeepers and the defenders more than usual. With each goal, usually you'd think, oh, if it was a clean sheet being wiped out, then that would be worth -4. But it's actually each goal conceded being worth -4 on the BPS. So for those that don't know, the BPS is kind of what makes the bonus points, the bonus point system. So I think that's really interesting, because when you look at someone like a Kieran Trippier, he was such a bonus points magnet in the past, even if his team conceded. Whereas now, I think, because you can, get -4 on the BPS for each goal you concede, it's very much dependent more on keeping those clean sheets. And maybe that means we start to look more at cheaper assets, like from the same team. If, for instance, if Botman is fit, which he's not at the moment, but, he's at 4.5, and you save that money, and you get just as much benefit, because kind of the things that Trippier would do throughout a game to gain BPS is not going to be as frequent now with those changes. I think it's quite harsh on defenders, but I also think it won't change our approach that much, right? Because you're still going to pick a lot of the attacking fullbacks for the upside, probably.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're right. And I think, like you said, it might mean that kind of centre backs, I'm thinking like Gabriel, people like that, centre backs might be more in demand than possibly the fullbacks who are more involved in the game. So, yeah, it's an interesting change, but overall, it probably shouldn't impact too much on defensive selections.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting for saving a penalty again is a thing that does often outskew the bonus points in previous seasons. So you look at Areola last season, I think he saved the penalty up at Goodison Park, and he saved one against Chelsea where, you can concede a few goals in a game. And if you save a penalty, then you're pretty much guaranteed to get a lot of bonus points there. And in the past, I think that has been a bit too skewed. So I think that is the right call to reduce it from 15 to 9 on the BPS system. But yeah, when it comes to kind of goal line clearances, I mean, they don't happen a lot, but they will be worth 3 BPS now. The thing that I looked at, which is really interesting, I think, is fouls won, because, it's 1 BPS in the system, but you look at a lot of the players that, won a lot of fouls last season. You usually think of players like Jack Grealish and the like, but it's actually quite surprising to see who's up there. The likes of Ezri Konsa winning a lot of fouls last season. You've got, and the other thing to factor in with this is the shots on target change to the BPS. Now, each shot on target being worth 2 BPS is interesting, because I think for teams that don't have a lot of shots or concede a lot of shots, or don't have many players in their team that hoover up those shots. So if you give an example of an Everton who were, very solid in defense last season, right? Mikalenko, Tarkowski, those sort of players. Calvert-Lewin didn't have the best of seasons last year, and we'll see if he's better this year. But, they don't have a lot of shots in general. So, therefore, you'd say defensively they're pretty solid when it comes to kind of not conceding a lot of shots, because you've got to factor in that it's good for the attackers up against them if they're taking shots, because they're getting more in the BPS. But a team that restricts the shots that are against them, and then also don't take many shots themselves to hoover up those BPSs to take it away from the defenders, means, some Everton defense might be a good strategy. So do you think you're going to be changing your kind of players you pick based on these changes to the BPS, the shots on target, especially and the fouls won?
I think it's worth bearing in mind, certainly, when you're trying to pick players, especially, I think, with the shots on target changes and the fouls won. There's, like you said, players like Jack Grealish, Doku, kind of progressive players who kind of draw their men out. A lot, maybe wingers might, like Madueke, I'm thinking, people like that who kind of take on their man. They're going to become more valuable in the game. I'm not sure if they'll be kind of the sole reason I'd pick a player in terms of transferring them in, but it's definitely something to bear in mind and factor into your decision making when you're looking to make transfers, for sure.
Yeah, I think it will definitely make those kind of 50-50 decisions a little bit easier, when you're picking a player from the same team, as we said with, centre backs and maybe Konsa, if you're picking between Konsa and Cash and something, and you look at those fouls won, or you look at certain players that have a lot of shots on target, it might just swing it in the balance. And it's definitely an interesting change. Also, there has been a few changes announced in the FPL challenge mode. I'm not sure if many FPL managers were just as kind of invested in that last season, but for those that like it, I think it's an interesting change that they've kind of implemented there, because it was some quite kind of comical at times changes of challenges, and goalkeepers getting points and forwards getting double points. I think these sort of things are good just for FPL challenge, but they've now changed it to be a five-a-side sort of system. You got different like rankings you can earn, and being a legend and gold and all these things. So I think what they've done there is exciting. And for those that do like FPL challenge, I think it's definitely refreshed it in the right way. Personally, I'm more the classic game, and I'm going to stick to that. But if it floats your boat, it's not too bad, is it? So I think it's nice to have that option for those more engaged managers, or for the casual managers that like a little challenge each week, and don't think so much about the players they're picking, right?
Yeah, no, I think I saw the changes to the challenge game, and it sounds like there've been some drastic changes from last year. So yeah, it's I think, like you say, to be honest, I didn't really play it much last season, but for those players who do, I think it's going to definitely improve the experience for sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. And there's some really interesting rule changes. So I think official FPL have done some nice work there. In terms of the prices, then we'll get into our kind of reaction of that. Obviously, the game kind of was drip feeding them on Twitter, and the game launched last week. But the prices started the Thursday before that, which was kind of interesting over the weekend leading up to the Euros final. A lot of people thought, oh, maybe if England win, give us a nice gift of FPL launching on the Monday after. But it ended up being obviously on the Wednesday. So the first prize that we received was the big one, the most expensive FPL player of all time. Erling Haaland comes in at 15 million. I mean, my initial reaction to this was, I like it. I didn't really see why he was priced up, to be honest, because compared to his previous seasons, he had a bit of a lull last season. Obviously, a lot of injuries. Obviously, he still had an amazing season, Premier League top scorer. But yeah, at the end of the day, I didn't expect a price rise. I think it's more a thing, they did it to stop everyone owning him at the start of this season, because his ownership at the start of last season was just ridiculous. I think it was 93% owned at the start of the season, and it's just too high, because you get to stages in last season where people would captain him and not want him to return because his EO was 200%, and it actually hurt your rank for you to captain him. So do you think this is the right move? Because I honestly thought it was a bit harsh from official FPL, not based on what he did last season. It didn't seem that was in line with each other, but in terms of overall in the game, owning him, I think it's maybe quite a good play.
No, I agree totally what you've said, because I think it probably wasn't justified for him to have a price rise, I thought he probably would have stayed at 14 million, but as you've explained there, like the ownership they had at the beginning of last season was just ridiculous, really. And I think increasing that price by, even though it is just by 1 million, I think it's going to provide a big decision for managers to make, especially at the start of the season, whether they want to have him in their teams or whether they can afford to risk not having him and going for a Watkins and Isak alternatively. So yeah, I think it's actually going to kind of boost the jeopardy almost of the game, because I don't think I'm just looking at the screen you have currently, Roberto, and 33% of people own him currently, which I think at this time last year, I'm sure that would have been double at least. So yeah, I think it's actually going to help, and I think it's a good change, even though possibly on the pitch it wasn't justified, the price rise.
Yeah, no, I think it's a nice change from official FPL, because it makes us have to think about it. I mean, I personally am quite a risk averse manager in certain ways, and I do still want to try and find a draft that has him in it, just because I always think with players like this, if he goes off and you can't find a way to get him, you basically have to wild card. It's quite hard to do it in a basically you can't do it in two moves, because he's so far further than any other forward in the game. He's 5 million more than any other basically. I think it's 9 million Watkins he drops down to. So it's a 6 million difference. So you really have to think about whether or not you go for him. And if you don't, then you kind of have to have a plan to get him in. But yeah, it's a nice change from official FPL. And I do think it just makes us question the value when you think about some of the forwards that were so explosive last season. Obviously, Watkins, the highest scorer in the game, coming in at 9 million. It's a nice price. I think it's actually a little bit underpriced because I expected him to come in at maybe 10, but it does make you think, saving that much money and then investing it in the rest of your midfield could be a quite viable strategy. I think it's just when you see Haaland, you think, oh, going without him could just be a really terrifying experience, especially because I guess, in previous seasons, he started the season quite strongly.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's always risk reward when it comes to kind of these big premium assets. And it is, like you say, it's really interesting that kind of there aren't any other forwards anywhere near that price bracket. It's just midfielders. Even Salah, the highest priced midfielder, is still quite far off Haaland. So yeah, it's definitely providing a decision to make. But I think it's also going to help the game in terms of we're going to see more different teams, different kind of structures of midfields. And I don't think not everyone will have Haaland this year. So I think it's actually going to be a good thing for the game, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We should hopefully see a lot of different teams, spreading that money around. In terms of kind of the cheapies that came in, obviously we saw Harwood Bellis from Southampton, Leif Davis at Ipswich come in, and Ricardo Pereira at 4.5 respectively, and then Harwood Bellis at 4.0. I think it's interesting this season because in previous seasons, I think it's been quite hard to find those 4.0 defenders at the start because we're not quite sure which ones are nailed on for minutes, and often they're from defenses that you just don't want to trust anyway. But seeing Southampton's run of fixtures at the start of the season is quite decent, and Harwood Bellis featured a lot for them in the Championship last season. So he's a nailed player for them. Makes a bit of sense for your final bench spot if you have to go that far down in terms of price. So I think it's interesting. I think Leif Davis definitely could be a really good shout, couldn't he? Because 18 assists last season. He might be the next Alfie Dowsey from last season.
Yeah, no, he'll definitely be in my squad, I think, to start the season. I know they've got a couple of tricky games to begin with Liverpool and City, but thereafter they've actually got it looks like a decent run of fixtures. So I think just his attacking threat for the price, he'll definitely be in my squad, and he's a nice little rotation option, I think. Yeah. Harwood Bellis again, like a 4.0 defender. I mean, he is pretty nailed to start most weeks, I would imagine. I'm not sure the Southampton have made any transfers at the back, but if not, then I think he's pretty certain to start. So again, if they've got a decent run of fixtures, he's probably one to target as well.
Yeah, another one from Southampton, which is interesting because we're not quite sure how many minutes he'll get, but he's recently signed is the actually legend from Burnley, which is Taylor, and I think he was someone that a lot of people owned back in his Burnley days, but we'll have to just monitor that and see, how many minutes he gets because, they have competition at fullback position and, Walker Peters, and I think there's a few options there for them to go with. So it's an intriguing, few prices there. Ricardo Pereira, remember back when he was, 6 million, a few seasons back. So 4.5 is a nice price, but again, let's wait and see. I think with Leicester because a new manager coming in with Steve Cooper, we'll have to see how they get on. And a few interesting prices with the North London boys. Havertz at 8 million, changed from a midfielder to a forward. When I saw that, I did think that's interesting because obviously ended last season really, really well. Does it put you off more that he's a forward now, or do you think that's a nice way into the Arsenal attack? Because it's Saka and Ødegaard, but with their prices, it's quite hard to reach them, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hard. There's pros and cons, isn't there? Because while he was a midfielder, he was kind of benefiting from getting kind of midfielders points whilst being a striker last season. But I think at the price he's at, again, he provides another alternative to Haaland in that kind of bracket with Isak, Watkins. So I think he'll definitely be a kind of alternative option for managers. And like you say, with Saka's price rise as well, it might be hard to afford him. So if you want a different route into that Arsenal attack, then he's definitely one to look into for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it'll be interesting to see if they sign another striker and, whether that plays into our thinking with Havertz. But at the moment, we'd assume that he starts the season in that forward position. And yeah, he's certainly a player who had a really good end to the season. So if he can just maintain that at the start of this season, then I think, yeah, it could be really, really nice value at that price. Richarlison coming in at 7 million, which I think is interesting because, he did have little, stages throughout last season where he was on really, really good form. It's just, again, the same thing goes with Tottenham, really. Will Tottenham sign another striker? There's been rumours of Tony. So I wonder whether Richarlison will be another one. But I think a lot of people looked at him last season at the start because of the fact he was a midfielder. I think, it's quite tricky when you think about Tottenham assets to fit in Richarlison maybe ahead of some of the other options.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? It's. I think a lot of it's dependent on where he is playing because we saw him and Son kind of rotate between that striker and left wing position, and I think whoever's playing striker, you'd probably say has the greater threat. I think again, and then also they've brought in Werner permanently as well, which is another option in those two positions. So it's quite a risky one, I think. Spurs forwards, probably Son is. Obviously, I think he's captain, isn't he? So he's probably pretty nailed on. But Richarlison could be a rewarding asset, and he was, like you say, at stages last season, especially when he was playing up front. So I think that's one to look into maybe 2 or 3 weeks down the line when we kind of have more clarity on how Spurs are going to set up. Because I couldn't tell you now how they're going to look in the first game of the season. So yeah, maybe pre-season as well, have a look into that, how they're shaping up. But we'll have to see.
It's interesting with Tottenham because, as you mentioned, Werner, moved to a midfielder from a forward and 0.5 cheaper than Richarlison. So you kind of think if Werner gets enough minutes, he ultimately didn't last season, and that's why not many people went for him in the end. But he did show, some signs of improvement with them. And as a 6.5 mid, it's interesting if we can see him get a few more minutes. But yeah, Richarlison coming at 7 is not a terrible price. And talking of 6.5 midfielders, I think an interesting one that a lot of people have talked about is Christopher Nkunku. Now, Chelsea, obviously last season, we know with Cole Palmer, he was a huge asset and, he's got a massive price hike up to 10.5. So it's going to be interesting how many people go for Nkunku. As a Chelsea fan, Chris, do you think Nkunku is nailed to start the season?
I wouldn't say he's nailed. I'd like to see how often he plays in pre-season before kind of making a judgment on whether he'll start the season. I think in the way that Maresca looks like he wants to line up Chelsea, there will only be one spot for either him or Nicholas Jackson as the striker. So I think at this stage, it's probably a bit early to say, and it would be risky to have him in an initial kind of concept squad. But I think have a later in pre-season. I know Chelsea play Manchester City, and that's the first game of the season for both teams in the Premier League. So I assume that Chelsea might play a team that is similar to what may play in that first game of the season. So I'd wait a little bit longer to see whether he is a good asset. But at 6.5 mil and a midfielder, as you say, he could be a very good asset this year.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about kind of fixture swings, and Chelsea's fixtures after that Man City game are really nice up until game week 7. So it's one of those things where, I mean, in my draft at the moment, I've not got any Chelsea at the minute, and I'm kind of worried about it a little bit because I'm thinking those fixtures post Man City are really lovely, but it's hard to fit in Palmer at the moment, and he's not easy to get to in one move. So then you're thinking, well, Nkunku, yeah, but will he get as many minutes? Will he be as fit and sharp? Because he had a lot of injuries last season. So it's one of those things where it's such a massive price drop that you think, oh, it's a nice kind of budget option, but if he's not quite at the same level as Palmer, you think, oh, it might just be a downgrade that's not necessary. So it's definitely an interesting price from official FPL. I think that was one of the ones that a lot of people were surprised by, just how low he was. But I think it's justified based on the minutes he got last season. So I think he was an interesting one. Another one that I, have seen a lot of people picking in drafts has been the Forest players. Basically, they've got a nice start to the season. Obviously, Hudson-Odoi's come in at 5.5. You got Gibbs White at 6.5, and Chris Wood at 6 is an interesting thing. So, do you think Forest players? I mean, it's not a bad price, is it, for Hudson-Odoi at 5.5? And you feel like he's had good moments last season. It's just whether he can kind of replicate it, I guess, going into this season.
Yeah, if he can sustain that form towards the end of the season that he was showing, I think he'd be a great pick at that price. And looking at the fixtures too, they have a really nice start by the looks. A couple of hard games in and amongst all of it. But yeah, I think definitely Forest forwards are ones to target. And even Gibbs White, I think, is 6.5 million, which isn't breaking the bank at all. Alanga as well, I think. He was rumoured to leave perhaps, but yeah, Hudson-Odoi, Gibbs White, Wood, like you said, I think with those fixtures in mind as well, they could all be very useful assets.
Yeah, and they've signed a new goalkeeper as well, Miguel, who, I don't know whether he'll, absolutely, get straight from the get go and be off and running and do well. But I think he's decent value for those fixtures, which is pretty nice up until game week 10. All in all, if Forest can kind of show the same defensive solidity they showed when Nuno came in, I think they did improve a lot defensively. Because under Cooper they were really struggling in that kind of defensive side of things. So I think it's interesting, and we will see a few of these 4.5 goalkeepers emerge. But it's always at the start of the season hard to pick which one will do well, because you saw last season a lot of people went for Pickford and it looked a logical pick, and then he was absolutely awful at the start of the season, and then he completely trolled everyone and ended up with the highest goalkeeping point scorer. So I think it's hard, but definitely he could be a good shout with some of the fixtures there. The other one that I was really interested to hear your thoughts on was some of the forwards, because when you look at outside of Watkins and outside of Haaland, you got some nice prices there for the likes of Isak at 8.5, Solanke at 7.5. Do you think Solanke is one that, because I've not seen him in many people's drafts. Obviously, he had a really good season last year, and Bournemouth fixtures aren't ideal. Maybe that's what's playing into it. But obviously, he was really, really good last season, and to be cheaper than Isak, to be cheaper than Havertz and Watkins, maybe one could go under the radar.
Yeah, definitely. I think obviously he's going into his second season under Iraola as well, so he'll be more familiar with how he wants to play, and he does play quite an aggressive front foot kind of game. So I think it really suits Solanke, as we saw last season with the amount of goals he scored. I think, yeah, the only reason I can think is that tough looking start to the season. But yeah, I think forwards I saw Mateta as well rose by 2 million, which I think that's probably a reflection of just his end of the season form under Glasner. But it's going to be intriguing, because I think a lot of managers are going to kind of pursue a no Haaland front line. So Solanke is definitely one who would probably be a great alternative alongside the Isaks, the Watkins, etc.
Yeah, I think he's definitely a great shout. Obviously, we'll have to see how Arne Slot kind of gets Liverpool working, but Cody Gakpo had a really good Euros, and the fixtures for Liverpool we know are the best of any team to start the season. So yeah, if Gakpo can nail down a spot, it's like we say every season with that Liverpool attack. They've got so many options with Jota, Darwin, Gakpo, Diaz, but if they can definitely have Gakpo starting every week, then yeah, he could be really nice value at 7.5 million. I think it's just interesting. We have to see how Liverpool set up, and he just never seems to look the same kind of Netherlands player that he's, when he's playing for Liverpool, it seems, Gakpo. But hopefully, this can be his season to really make a mockery of that price. And then Manchester City is interesting as well, I think, because, if you do want to go without Haaland, it's a massive jump in price to someone like a Phil Foden, who, obviously had his best season last year. And at 7, I think when you think about some of the players around that price point, look at Saka at 10, Son at 10, Palmer at 10.5. To see Foden, cheaper than all of those when he had such a good season last year is definitely interesting. And I think it gives you that decision to make when it comes to how you invest into your City attack, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's incredible that he is actually priced lower than those midfielders that you mentioned after the season he had. I think for a lot of managers, it could be a straight choice between having Foden or Haaland, having that Man City kind of forward slash midfielder. Yeah, I think he obviously had a fantastic season last year, and I mean, maybe in the first few weeks, as he comes back, he'll probably be late coming back for pre-season with all his kind of exertions at the Euros. So I think for me, he'll be one who I target maybe game week 4 or 5, I think, to bring
Yeah.
in. But yeah, I think again he's a great option. And if you're looking for a Man City forward, I mean, he was scoring at a similar rate per game as Haaland last year in terms of points. So yeah, I think he's a great option again this year.
And that's the thing, I guess, about City players, isn't it? You look at, if you looked at the first 6 game weeks, you'd say, oh, there's a few tricky fixtures in there for Man City. But then if you look at across the first 11 game weeks, it's a lot of green there. And even though it's a few reds in there, it's Man City and they can score points in any game. So they're fixture proof. So it does make a lot of kind of dilemmas and makes us think about our squad. Eberechi Eze has come in at 7 million, which I think is interesting. You look at potentially with Elise already gone, will he move on to another club like a Tottenham or a Man United? I really hope he doesn't. There's been rumours of Man City. I just think that would probably ruin him as an FPL asset. But at 7 million, we know how good he has been already for Palace, and I think being on penalties, being on set pieces, I think he could be a really nice option at that price. Look at players around the price of that, 6.5. There's a lot of 6.5 mids. Potentially someone like a Kudus, but the fixtures for West Ham are a bit tricky at the start of the season. Garnacho, I think as well, like 7.5s. Gordon just looks really, really nice for that price. But do you think Eze is one that, will stay at Palace? And do you think he's a better option if he does do that?
Oh yeah, definitely. If he stays at Palace, I think he's a fantastic kind of priced asset at 7 million. I think the way they finished the season under Glasner, you can kind of see what type of football they are going to play coming into this one, and he's going to be fundamental to that if they stay. So yeah, he's at 7 million. It's a fantastic price, and like you, I just hope he stays because if he does go to a Man City or something, his appeal just completely decline. So yeah, hopefully he does stay. And if he does, he's definitely one to think about, as it looks like Palace have a decent start to the season. So yeah, could be a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's some interesting prices there. Make sure you log into the FPL website and make your team. And let's give the mini league code for this season for the Form is Temporary podcast. So it's a head-to-head league once again. The code that you can join with is ORDVAG. So that's ORDVAG to join the head-to-head league for the Form is Temporary podcast. Make sure you do join that. It's always good fun every season. Now what we're going to get into is having a little look at some of your drafts we've been sent in. So we'll read it out for the podcast. We've got the first one here from FPL Roberto. He's gone with a current draft, nothing in the bank. In goal, he's got Flecken and Areola, which is interesting two 4.5s there, because you look at Flecken last season, he didn't have the strongest of seasons, but yet he still finished, fifth highest scoring goalkeeper. Got a lot of save points, obviously, with what we were saying about with the bonus point system and every goal conceded. It might be a bit less this season. But Areola's also in there. He was a very good value asset last season. There has been rumours of, potentially him leaving West Ham. So we'll have to kind of monitor that situation and see. But I think those two goalkeepers are pretty solid picks. Do you think rotating goalkeepers? Because I always think it looks great on paper. Before the game has started, you got the nice green fixtures for each goalkeeper. But would you go for a rotating goalkeeper like that, Flecken and Areola?
Oh God, it's difficult, isn't it? There's pros and cons again to that strategy. I think I can't see why not when both goalkeepers are nailed on to start pretty much every week. If Areola stays at West Ham, it proved a useful strategy last year at times, although it also didn't pay off at times with Dubravka and who was the other goalkeeper who was kind of rotating with after the January transfer window. I can't remember now, but I remember there was a stage where I was kind of rotating between two goalkeepers, and it does provide you with a lot of flexibility in it to like kind of cater to the different fixtures that teams have. So if you kind of can have that option, it definitely is something to go for. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I've done so many times, and every single time I'm like, yep, this is so logical. Let's get the fixtures. And then when you do it, it never works out how you want. You have, say one goalkeeper starting with a nice home fixture against Forest, and then you got your backup keeper away to Man City, and they end up getting more points. It's just, it's always painful when you see, playing goalkeepers get points in your bench. So I think my personal preference would be just start the season with, a locked in, set and forget goalkeeper, so let's say from a decent defense, and then you just have the backup goalie from that team, because then it just means you can kind of not have to worry about who you're picking each week. And across the season, like everyone's got bad fixtures at some point at the season, so you can't necessarily always have the optimal game week fixture for the goalkeeper, I think. So that's probably what I would suggest. But I think Flecken is definitely a decent shout. Fixtures for Brentford to start the season, they've got some nice home games. The away games are pretty hard. So I think it's definitely, viable to rotate Flecken with someone. I'm not sure Areola's the best one, though, because with West Ham's tricky start to the season, I'm not quite sure how many points there'd be there. And, with, the rumours with Areola, we'll have to see if he stays as well. So then the back five, the FPL Roberto's gone for, he's gone Saliba, Burn, Gvardiol, Konza, and Anderson, which, I'll throw over to you first. Do you think that, players like Gvardiol, Saliba, obviously those premium prices, do you think they're still worth going for? Because, Arsenal's run of fixtures is quite, tricky to start the season, but, someone like Gvardiol, we know how attacking he was at the end of last season. So do you think those two are worth their premium prices?
I think so, to be honest. Yeah, I think Gvardiol in particular, with that kind of attacking upside he provides as a left back, is definitely a wise investment. And Saliba too. We saw Arsenal; they can keep clean sheets against any team, no matter kind of the caliber of them. So. I think those are two good selections. I don't know, is Gabriel slightly more expensive than Saliba this season? Because Gabriel seems to have more of a attacking threat.
Well, they're the same price. They're both at 6 million. So I think maybe it's funny. I've looked at the ownership, and a lot of people have just flocked towards Saliba. You know what it probably is? They're scarred from the start of last season when But I think logically, Gabriel is the one I'd always pick. When they're at the same price, Saliba does get a lot of bonus points, but with potentially the shots on target rule adding to the BPS system, thinking of Gabriel, that might suit him a bit better as well. So I think they're decent options, but maybe for my preference with fixtures when it comes to defenders, I think there's some tough games in there. I would personally maybe sway away from Arsenal at the start defensively. Maybe you can pick an attacker or two, but it's one of those ones where I might just wait and see and hop on later. Burn, Konza, and Anderson, all 4.5 options that have been very popular at the start of this game launching. I think Burn is ridiculous in terms of his ownership. A lot of people flock towards him, but it is interesting because I don't think a lot of Newcastle fans are confident he will be definitely starting. They've got options there with Livramento, Hall, and there's been rumours of Trippier possibly leaving, so that could make Livramento at 4.5 a better option. But when you think about Burn, they haven't got many centre-back options, but they've also got players like Hall. There's a lot of options there for them to potentially use other than Burn. So I'm not too keen on Dan Burn personally, but I think if he nails down a spot, then he could definitely be good value.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I was interested to see what you thought about that, because a lot of people are kind of flocking towards him as their Newcastle defender, and I think his price is very low. That was one of the most surprising kind of takeaways from the price reveals. I think, like you say, it just depends whether he can kind of cement that left back spot as he did a couple of seasons ago. But I think you said earlier Botman's still injured, so perhaps that offers another route for him into the starting lineup. I'm not sure, but again, at that price and with Newcastle's decent looking fixtures, I think I'm tempted by Dan Burn definitely to start the season.
Yeah, he's an interesting one. We'll have to kind of assess in pre-season his minutes. Konza is interesting as well. We mentioned earlier about the amount of fouls he won last season, so he could, be a good route to points. And when you look at Aston Villa's starting fixtures, they're looking very, very good outside of game week 2. So I think Konza's a really nice shout. Again, a 4.5 option who looks really well priced. And then you got Anderson, who was a really good goal threat last season for Palace, and similarly, Palace were one of the better defenses. He's just a really nice option. When you look at Daniel Munoz, who's also a nice pick, but you'd probably save that 0.5 and use it elsewhere. So I think Anderson, being the same price as Mark Gay, it makes it very easy to go for Joachim really there. But I think it's a nice defense. The only one I would maybe be a bit cautious with is Dan Burn, but Saliba's fixtures, it depends how much you're going to start him for those opening few games. The midfield is looking interesting. Gordon, Eze, and Nkunku, Johnson, and Hudson-Odoi. I think Hudson-Odoi has been one that a lot of people have flocked to because of those nice Forest fixtures to start the season. I quite like the Brennan Johnson pick. Now, he's a bit risky, but if we see that he gets more minutes this season, obviously he's still battling with Kulusevski for that spot. Although Kulusevski was much more worse than him last season, I do think there's a bit of rotation probably there. Do you think that's about fair with Brennan Johnson?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's just that kind of the risk of him not starting games. I know he came on a few times and scored goals coming off the bench, though, and we know Postecoglou isn't afraid of making early substitutions as well. So, it's a risky one, but again, it's a bold one. It's a good differential, I would imagine, at this stage.
Absolutely. And Kunku's there, who we've talked about, makes a lot of sense with those fixtures if he's, nailed down a spot. Eze is a really nice pick as well. Gordon makes up the midfield, and then a front three of Isak, Haaland, and Watkins. So he's gone for the big three up front. It's looking tasty, I can't lie. Obviously, when you look at the whole squad, you got no Salah. So you kind of going to probably be captaining Haaland most weeks. At 15 million, you probably want to justify captaining him to kind of measure out with that price. But I think there's definitely some nice picks there. Overall, I think I'd rate it probably a solid 7 out of 10. I think it's a very, very decent shout. Maybe Saliba, the fixtures a bit tricky for Arsenal. Burn, we'll have to see how many minutes he's going to get. And the same thing goes for Johnson. But outside of that, it's a very solid midfield forward line. Maybe just a few tweaks on the goalkeepers is the only thing we'd say there. The next draft we've got is from Ruben Villa _ FPL, big follower of the pod. He's come in with two goalkeepers, one playing goalkeeper and one non-playing. He's gone for Dean Henderson at Crystal Palace, which is an interesting one. Do you think Henderson will start the season ahead of Sam Johnson?
That is a very interesting one. Again, it's a slight tinge of risk with it because obviously Johnston was first choice before Glasner came in, I believe, and before his injury. So, it's a tricky one. I think Henderson will probably start the season. So I think it's a good shout for now, but definitely see how that develops over the first few game weeks.
Yeah, I think it's a decent shout. He does pick up save points and the fixtures for Palace to start the season are quite nice. So I don't hate Henderson as a pick. And obviously he's got a non-playing backup of Paulson from Bournemouth. Which is absolutely the way to go to, save money. It's just that I think if you're going to go for a 4.0, maybe it makes more sense to go for a team with, a 4.5 and a 4.0. So in this case, he's gone for Bournemouth. But if he doesn't fancy Henderson, he could go for another 4.5 with a 4.0 backup. It's just that it's a shame, really, because we don't know who's Palace, number one goalkeeper is going to be. They've priced them both 4.5. Johnson and Henderson, so that makes it a bit more tricky to fit them both in. But you could definitely if you can find a 0.5 somewhere else to fit Johnston in, that's also a strategy worth considering. Murillo is at the back from Forest, which is I think is an interesting pick with Forest nice start to the season with fixtures. Trent is in there, which I really do like. I think that's a nice shout at 7 million. Fixtures for Liverpool looking really strong, and then Gvardiol. So I think actually I really like that back three with Murillo there. I think. Do you think Trent is worth his price this season, Chris? Because 7 million is actually the cheapest he's ever been. since the 1920 season. And with those set of fixtures for Liverpool, it could be quite fruitful, couldn't it?
Yeah, I think definitely at that price range, it could be very, very rewarding with the start they've got to the season. So, yeah, if you can afford kind of that premium bracket defender like Trent, I think he will definitely be worthwhile. It also, we're kind of yet to see whether he will be like kind of inverting as he did last season under Klopp, which kind of did enhance his kind of attacking upside. But even from a fullback position, as we've seen previous seasons, his crossing is just deadly. So yeah, I think it's a great option if you can afford him for sure.
Yeah. And the midfield is looking pretty nice. Salah, we talked about, Gordon and Kunku. Rodgers is in there, which is an interesting pick because he's been doing well in pre-season for Aston Villa. 5 million. Again, he's another one where it's a bit of a wait and see. Now, as much as he's been doing well in pre-season, will he be starting? He did have a point towards the end of the season where he was kind of involved and getting minutes. So he could be a bit of a game breaker if we're sure about his minutes, but it's definitely a wait and see, I think, at the moment. Personally, I'm not too keen on it just because I think, at 5 million, there aren't too many, appetizing picks around that price point. So it's one of those things where if he does, start the season, but then drops off in form, it's quite a hard price point to move from. Whereas you look at someone else at the 6.5 range, you can drop down to a 5.5, or you can go around that sort of, there's a lot of good options at 6.5. So that's the only thing I would say with Rodgers. But, I understand it where people have to try and afford. So they've gone for the Ruben's gone for the Salah and Haaland double up. And that's probably why Rodgers is in here, which I quite like. Salah and Haaland both, very exciting to have those two as captain options. And then Isak alongside Chris Wood, who we've talked about. Wood, got good fixtures again. It will be interesting to see whether Awani starts over him, but I think Wood definitely did prove himself at points last season. And when you look at 6 million forwards, I mean, there's not a lot to pick from. But you got Joao Pedro at 5.5. Whether he'll play, who knows? Armstrong at 5.5. So you could definitely downgrade if you need to. But Chris Wood, do you think he's a good shout?
Good shout, definitely, because kind of like an enabler to allow him to have Salah, Haaland, Trent in his team. I think, yeah, as kind of 6 million options goes in that bracket, he's definitely probably the pick of them. So if he does start, that is with our new. But yeah, I really like the Salah Haaland double up in that team. I think both of them haven't been involved in an international tournament this summer, so they're fully rested. They've had a full pre-season under their belt, and for me, that's one of the key considerations in the first few weeks, those players who are coming in completely fresh. So I really like that, Salah and Haaland. Yeah,
absolutely. I've looked at the bench and it's very slim pickings, as you can imagine, with Barco from Brighton, who people think might start with Estupinian out at the start of the season. Davis, as we mentioned, from Ipswich. And then we got Bergval, who's just signed for Tottenham, who, is 4.5. I don't know if he'll get many minutes, but, he's not the worst 4.5 midfielder option. So it's a decent side. I would just say that with the bench being quite weak and, Rodgers in there alongside just to afford the Trent, Salah, Haaland kind of trio, it is a little bit, if things go wrong, there's not much room to maneuver, and you'd have to be selling your big hitters to kind of move funds around, which is not an ideal kind of place to be. If you have your kind of prices more spread out, then you can be a bit more flexible when it comes to transfers. So I think I like the fact you've gone Trent. I like Gvardiol. I like Salah and Haaland. The bench, though, I'm not sure about. So I think maybe a 7.5 out of 10 for this one, but it's a very solid, very decent shout of a team. The next one we've got is from FPL_Wheeler. It's Adam. He's got a very decent team. He's trying to beat me like he did last season, and we're not going to make sure that doesn't happen again. But he's gone in goal with Miguel, who we talked about earlier. I think he could be an okay option based on how Forest, improved defensively under Nuno. They've got good fixtures to start the season. Again, we'll have to see how he kind of settles to life in the Premier League. But then he's got back three that I really like. I've got to be honest. Trent Alexander-Arnold, Mikalenko, Gvardiol looks very decent. I think with what we talked about with Everton's kind of defense, and they're not taking too many shots, which helps them with the BPS. I think Gvardiol and Trent is a nice little double double act in the back line as well. You know, the two kind of premium picks in defence. I think when it comes to those attacking fullbacks, they are just always the most exciting. It's not always easy to squeeze them in. I think a lot of kind of Salah Haaland drafts will have those 4.5 defenders because the budget is spent elsewhere. But you know, it's nice to have a Salah in this team and a Palmer alongside Trent and Gvardiol. So do you think Gvardiol and Trent is it too heavy at the back, or would you just pick one of them?
I'd probably pick one, but again, I can see why Adams. It's on paper it looks brilliant to have them both in there, just because of that attacking upside as well. So I'm probably just going to go with one or the other, but it's very good to have those two in the defence together. And Mykolenko alongside them is quite a solid pick because we know Everton are usually quite solid defensively under Sean Dyche. So he might complement those two kind of more premium picks really well.
Yeah, absolutely. Midfield, he's gone Salah, Palmer, Gordon, and Eze, which I really like all of them. I think there's, you know, a lot of kind of benefits with going for this kind of non-Haaland draft is you can just stack the midfield and pick. You know, there's not a single weak spot there in that midfield. You know, you look at some of the more cheap options like your 4.5 mids or your 5 mil mids or your 6.5s, and you're kind of thinking, well, they're decent, they're not quite premium. And these are all really good options. Eze looks a really nice pick. Obviously, Palmer, with those fixtures come game week 2, is going to be a really nice own. And then in the front three, he's gone for Watkins, Isak, and Muniz. Muniz is an interesting one because Fulham's fixtures to start the season are actually quite good. They've got Man United to start with, but then it's a really nice run. So I think Muniz at 6 mil is another decent value option. We'll have to see whether he gets, you know, the starts with obviously Jimenez, and they've got Carlos Vinicius in there too. But I do like that kind of that front five. Having Muniz as well with a rotation option of Anderson and Muniz, you got, you know, Anderson on the bench if you need to rotate for fixtures. You've got a really strong midfield four, and then those three up top. So yeah, what do you rate this one out of 10? I think it's a solid one, isn't it?
It's very balanced, isn't it? I like it, and it's got a good blend of kind of those premium assets, but also really good budget enablers. So I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10.
I think I'd agree. I think obviously he's got Bergvall and Burgess on the bench with a Fulham non-playing goalie as well. I think, yeah, both of those picks. I think having one defensive, you know, substitute is a nice place to be because you don't want to completely, you know, non-playing bench, but have one or two on there just in case anything goes wrong is quite a nice place to be. Yeah, very solid team. I'm just not too sure on picking both Gvardiol and Trent. And also, I think maybe it's just me, but I think going without Haaland, I can't get round to it. But if you're going to captain like someone else, like an Isak against Southampton, then I understand it. It's that game week 2 fixture at home to Ipswich. That's the one.
Yeah.
If you're not selling Palmer or you're not selling one of your heavy hitters, how are you getting there? And I'm definitely just one of those ones where I just want to start with him and make it easier for myself. But that's just me. FPL Discomforts draft is looking quite similar, but it's looking good as well. He's also gone with Miguel in goal. A back three of Barco, Maatsen, and Vardiol. I think Maatsen's interesting at 5 million. Comes in a bit more expensive than, you know, your other Villa defenders. But we'll have to see again with him because, you know, they've got lots of options. Luca Dean, they can play you know, at left back. They could play quite a few different options there. So I'm not sure. What do you think? Maatsen will definitely start at fullback?
Maatsen is a very intriguing one because although he played fullback for Borussia Dortmund, he's very, very versatile. Like I remember under Pochettino in the pre-season, he played as an attacking midfielder and he was delivering goals and assists. So I'm actually wondering whether he might be playing as a winger under Emery, because obviously, like you said, they've got two good fullbacks there, Dina and Moreno.
Yeah.
So I think he may play further forward, and if he is a defender in the game, then I think that could be a good route to points. If he does start again, they've got a lot of competition for areas in those positions as well, further up the pitch. But they've spent a lot of money on him, so yeah, that could be a factor, definitely.
I think it's interesting. My personal preference is to save the 0.5 and go for Konza, who we know is going to start. But it's definitely, if he does play, there's upside there to chase. Johnson, who we've talked about already, maybe a bit of a risk for minutes, but if he does nail down a spot, it's two nice fixtures to start the season for Spurs with Leicester and Everton, so I don't mind that at all. Hudson-Odoi, Gordon, and Salah looking like a nice midfield, that. And then he's gone for a front three of Haaland, Wood, and Havertz, which is interesting because talked about Kai Havertz a little bit already. Whether or not he is the answer to your Arsenal attack, again, the fixtures aren't amazing, but if he can be the nailed-on striker, I mean, it looks like a nice front three, but obviously Wood and Havertz, they both have elements of risk attached to both of them, so I don't mind it, but would you prefer going for like two up front, like a Haaland and an Isak, or going all three? Because I've seen a lot of people going for all three at the minute.
I think at the moment, I would be going for a front three. I think it's quite dependent on whether you want Haaland in your team as well. I think if you do, it's probably more likely you are going to have a three-man front line with maybe a cheaper option in there, like a Wood, like a Muniz, like an Armstrong, for example, who are kind of enable you to invest in your defence and midfield as well. Yeah, Havertz is a very interesting. I think for a lot of people, it might be kind of a straight shootout between him and Isak for one of those spots. Watkins potentially as well. I know he's a little bit higher, isn't it? 9 million. But yeah, like you said, a lot of it depends on whether Arsenal decide to recruit another striker. If not, then I can't see any reason why not with how he performed last season.
Yeah. And on the bench, he's got backup Leicester goalie, Gay and Kunku and Sugawara. So interesting, he's got a couple of playing bench options there.
Strong bench.
If Nkunku can start, then he's got options off the bench. The only thing I would say is I just think, Barco, I don't know if would actually start him. He's got him starting at the moment, but I'm just not sure about Barco. Even if he does get minutes with the Estupinian out, I'm just not sure if the fixtures, Brighton's fixtures aren't great to start the season. And, we know how defensively they were last season. So I'm not too confident on that one. I also think Johnson's a bit of a risk. I'm not sure about Havertz. Depends if, Arsenal sign another striker. It's okay. I think it's probably a 7.5 again. It's a decent attempt. I really like the Gordon, Hudson-Odoi, Salah, along with Gvardiol, but I'm just not sure on the rest of it, I'm afraid. So I like the fact they've got squad depth, though. I like the fact they've got options to rotate if need. And then we've got the next one from No FPL. Now, this is interesting. He's very happy. The podcast is back again. He says, I'm sure it will be great this year. Thank you again, No FPL. His draft, he's got Sanchez and a 4.0 goalkeeper. He's not actually said who that is, but I imagine it's just a nobody. So I think Sanchez is interesting because a lot of people have defaulted to him because there's been rumours that Sanchez will be the kind of first choice pick for that Chelsea team. I think Maresca might go for him, but there's been rumours of like Lunin coming in. So do you think Sanchez is worth the shout? Obviously, a lot to wait and see with pre-season with that, but obviously he's got great fixes after that Man City game, right?
Yeah, no, I think from what I've heard as well from rumours, it looks like that he will be the starting goalkeeper, starting number one next season. I know Chelsea are in negotiations with a Villarreal goalkeeper who's going to kind of come in as a backup initially. So I think Sanchez is a good pick as kind of your starting goalkeeper to start the season. What price is he?
He's coming at 4.5.
Okay, that's tremendous value then, because I think
it's great, but it's just all the Chelsea goalkeepers are basically 4.5. So you're like, well, depends who starts. You can't, and that's the annoying thing is you can't have a 4.5 and a 4.0. You've got to have two.
Yeah.
So it's tricky. I don't imagine Kepa will probably be in line to play. So then you're looking at Sanchez. All right, Petrovic. Petrovic looks like he might leave as well. So I'm not quite sure who's gonna slot in there, but it's a wait and see for sure. But I don't think it's as bad as everyone's making out that, okay, Sanchez, why would you pick him? There's reason to it because of the price, being quite nice in those fixtures. But I think maybe someone else might just be worth paying a little bit extra for just because they'll start. Whereas it's a bit up in the air for Chelsea. We'll have to see. But could definitely be one that develops into something quite nice. And then the defense he's gone for, he's got Trent, Mikalenko, Gvardiol, Castagna, and he's gone for a 4.0 option of Jacob Greaves at Ipswich. I really like that defense, especially I like the kind of Trent, Mikalenko, Gvardiol triple up we've talked about already. Castagna is an interesting one. We've talked about Fulham, who've got nice fixtures, and Jacob Greaves, as an Ipswich, newcomer from Hull, he's likely to be nailed, and he's a bit of a threat at set pieces, so could be actually a decent 4.0 shout, couldn't he?
Yeah, no, I really like that whole defence, to be honest. If Castagna can kind of replicate the form he had at Leicester a couple of seasons ago, we know he's got that attacking upside, and Fulham are decent defensively as well. And like you say, Greaves, last season, he topped a lot of kind of the defensive metrics, like kind of aerial clearances and things like that. And he was a threat, like you say, from set pieces. So at the price he is, and I agree with you, I think he will be the starting centre back.
Yeah,
one of them. I think he is a very good pick as a budget enabler.
absolutely. The midfield I'm liking as well, to be honest. Garnacho, Salah, Palmer, Hudson-Odoi, and Gordon is what he's gone for, and I think all of those have got their strengths. Garnacho's interesting because I think the start to the season for Man United is quite nice. Certainly, in the first 4 weeks or so, it's interesting whether or not Garnacho and Rashford will be worth consideration. Obviously, Bruno is the one you really want to have, but he's 8.5 as he was last season. It's just a lot of people will pick like other 8.5s over Fernandez, like Erdegaard and the rest. So I think Garnacho is quite tempting at that price of 6.5, where there's a few options there that 6.5 Kudus, the fixtures aren't as good. You've got a few trickier fixtures for some of the options, whereas Garnacho, we know, had really good periods last season, so I really like that Garnacho pick. I'm not too sure. He's gone for a front three of Armstrong, Watkins, and Isak. With Armstrong, I like it, but it's one of those where if you don't start him every week, he could punish you because he's on set pieces. Well, he's on penalties, and he's nailed, so he could do quite well. But it's one of those ones where he's at that price where you want to have him, but it's also tricky to know whether you start him every week, isn't it?
Yeah, that is it's a bit of a dilemma already for him, kind of especially with his defense looking so strong. He probably will want to play four defenders.
Yeah.
That is really difficult. I think it's never a nice scenario to be in when you've got a substitute who could kind of really punish you by delivering those points. So yeah, I think like you mentioned earlier, Southampton look like they have a decent run of fixtures to start the season. So I think I like that as a pick alongside the two other more expensive forwards. I think he's a good, at that price range, he's very good value.
Yeah, I think it's a well-balanced squad, this one, to be honest. The only thing I would say is Armstrong, if you like, for me, I would rather go from Armstrong to a 4.5 striker and then move like the 4.0 defender to a more expensive defender, just because I just think there's so much value in those defenders. Like the 4.5s, there's some great options, the 5s, the 5.5s. I just think, maybe that's just me, but having that headache every week of, who am I going to start when your only real bench fodder there is Greaves. I just think having, someone who's not going to punish you, the chances of a defender punishing you at 4.5 or 5, it feels less likely than an Armstrong, right? So that's why I think downgrading sometimes can be good to just have that certainty about who you start each week. But outside of that, I'm really liking this. So I actually think this is probably the best one I've seen so far. So I'd say 8.5 out of 10. I think that's a very, very solid shout. And we're going to end this episode with a little reveal of what my draft is looking like at this stage. I've had a few tinkers with it. I'm to be honest, I haven't made as many drafts as I thought I would have done, but it's very early stages, so we'll have to see how things develop in pre-season. But for the podcast, we'll read it out and see what Chris thinks. I've gone for Pope and Dubravka at the moment, in between the sticks. I've talked about that kind of headache of having two goalkeepers that are playing, and maybe just having a playing goalie and a backup might just make the most sense. Newcastle, obviously defensively last season, were very strong for a lot of the season. They had their wobbles, but so did every team last season defensively. So I think going into this season, a nice run of fixtures for Newcastle to start. Southampton at home, I think Pope, back from injury now, he's always been a great FPL points getter, and 5 million I think is a nice price for him. So yeah, I've gone for that. The only thing it does do is limit my Newcastle players elsewhere, because obviously it takes up 2 spots. But to be honest, I'm willing to do that in certain occasions where it's a good defense, because then I can be sure that I'll get the points one way or the other through Dubravka on the bench there. And the back 3 I've gone for is Trent, Mikalenko, and Anderson. I think for me, I look at those fixtures. I don't know about you, Chris, and I just think I just need Trent. Like, the fixtures just tempt me so much. And yeah, 7 million, he's a nice price. I'm surprised really that someone like Robertson is still as high as 6 million. I thought he would have a bit more of a price drop. So maybe he could be an option later on in the season. But I just think at the moment Trent is the one to really attack those fixtures. Mikalenko we talked about as well. Anderson is in there. The only thing is I've felt that my defense needs a bit of rotation, so I've got some defensive options if I need them, like Castagne's there as a little backup, Wout Face if Leicester kind of start putting some form together. So yeah, Trent, Mikalenko, Anderson, Castagna, and Face is an interesting back 5. Do you think that there are some good options there?
I really like that. Yeah, again, you've got good depth there as well, like you said, to kind of rotate depending on form, fixtures, etc. Obviously, you got the Alexander Arnold in, which is a massive plus, especially with the fixtures they have. And yeah, it's just a very well balanced defense. And I like your goalkeeper selections too with Newcastle. I think they've got a nice start to the season, so I think you'd probably expect them to keep a few clean sheets. And I assume Pope will be kind of taking back the number 1 shirt, but
Yeah,
having Dubravka there just in case he does, for some reason, does be number 1. Yeah, it's really good, really balanced, and it kind of mitigates all the risks, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of time for this to change, of course, but at the moment, this is what I'm thinking is go for a Haaland draft, and then I can always take the money out if Haaland's not performing. And I think the thing I am a bit concerned about is kind of the game week 2, game week 3 swing, because a lot of people will move towards Chelsea and Aston Villa. Now, I have got Leon Bailey in there as kind of my Villa coverage. Obviously, Watkins would have been the ideal scenario, but I just can't see myself going without Alexander Isak, to be honest, to start the season. So I've gone with Haaland and Isak up top, midfield of Bailey, Hudson-Odoi, Salah, Eze, and Garnacho. And with Bailey, I think the fact that now Diaby's gone to Saudi, I think is really exciting for Bailey's potential minutes. He had good spells last season. Villa's fixtures just look really, really good. And if I haven't got Watkins, then I think I need a piece of that Villa pie, really. So I think Bailey, is in there for that reason at 6.5. I think it's quite a nice price. You know what you're going to get with Bailey. You're going to get a attacking winger that really goes at defenses, whereas maybe some of the other 6.5 options like a Szoboszlai or a Rice or a Rodri are just not as attacking, in my opinion. So I think that's why I've gone for him there. Hudson-Odoi, we've talked about, just looks a really sensible pick. Gibbs White, I prefer, but I just don't think he's worth the extra million. I think Hudson-Odoi is just as good with that kind of money saved. And yeah, he had good spells last season. So I'm hoping with those fixtures, he can really start strong. Salah has to be there for me. Captain game week 1, Ipswich away. His game week 1 record just speaks for itself. And I don't think that Salah will be absolutely amazing to start the season, but I still think he'll be worth owning for a captaincy option. And, I just want to have that option really. But if it all goes badly, then I can downgrade, and that gives me the kind of funds to move elsewhere. Whereas if you go without a Haaland Salah and you do spread your funds, although it's flexible to a point, it's also not easy to then get the big hitters and the premium players in. So Eze is there alongside Garnacho. Eberechi Eze, we've talked about. Again, good fixtures. And then Haaland and Isak up top. I do think I'm one of the minority that have gone with 2 up front. A lot of people have gone for the 3. But I look at it and think I like the value in midfield. I don't know if you agree, Chris, but the midfield to me looks like a place where there aren't too many 4.5 options where I'm that bothered by. So, maybe going for a 5 midfield is perhaps an option where it gives you those options to rotate.
Yeah, I think it's. I think having a player like Garnacho as well, who's pretty nailed to start, I would imagine, most weeks is a good option to have as kind of a lower priced asset in that midfield. I really like the Bailey is one I've been kind of mulling over. I think he's as you said, with Diaby leaving, he is likely to be playing up top with Watkins. And I think that and he's still classified as a midfielder in the game, which I think, and at the price as well. I to be honest, I think he's a bit of a no-brainer, really. If you want to make inroads into that Villa attack and you can't afford Watkins, which for me, I think I'm going to be similar with you. I really want Isak in my starting lineup to start the season, and Salah, like you say, is no-brainer with his game week 1 record. So yeah, it's a really well-balanced team, and like you say, it offers that flexibility in the sense that when the fixture swings do come for Chelsea, for Arsenal, teams like that, that you can maybe get rid of a Salah or even a Haaland if he's not playing as well as you'd hoped, to then downgrade to a Palmer, a Foden, for example. So that's definitely the strategy I'm going to adopt to start the season. I think
the way I think of it is, what are the chances that both Haaland and Salah don't have good starts?
Yeah, so exactly.
By having both of them, it's kind of like, well, the chances are there'll be one I want to keep and one that I might not want to. So then you can kind of distribute the funds that way. Whereas if you start with maybe only one of them and Haaland, say, is the one you pick and he's amazing start of season, and then you need to get to Salah, well, it's quite tricky because you don't want to sell Haaland. But having that kind of both of them gives you that option to downgrade when necessary. So I think that's why I'm kind of happy with that. When I built all my drafts, I've just always felt I'd want to have the 3 of Trent, Salah, and Haaland, just because, I don't know, they're like comfort blankets to me. I need them in my team, and then I think about the rest. Now, I get it does compromise your team a lot. We've talked about Saka's, Palmer's, Son's that I haven't been able to fit in here. But at the end of the day, I can move to those if I need to, because I've got the most expensive players in the game in my team. So I think it just does give that. And I think with the 5 free transfers thing, with that flexibility, if I'm happy with his team and it all goes well, then I've got those 5 free transfers to quickly move away from Haaland. Like, the same goes for those without Haaland, and they can switch back to Haaland. But then you'll be having no Haaland throughout all those weeks. If he starts strong and you have to keep rolling without him, then it might be quite painful. And yeah, Haaland's easier to get rid of and redistribute the funds in less transfers rather than having to roll them up and then get them. So I think that makes more sense to me. Castagne's there as well as a kind of backup option with nice fixtures for Fulham as well. Face, I think he's going to start for Leicester, and he's just my 4.0. And then I got Stewart, who actually might start for Southampton, with obviously them selling the likes of Che Adams. I think he could get some minutes. He featured for them last season. So yeah, not a bad shout, 4.5 for the forward line, and that's my team. So I'm not going to rate my own team because I think it's okay. It's very much early days in the season. Obviously, still a few weeks to go until that Game 1 deadline. But fingers crossed, we can win FPL this year and get absolute world fame. But we'll see how it goes. Has the itch been scratched for you then, Chris, kicking off this season?
Oh, it definitely has. It is definitely, doing this pod has made me even more excited. I think with all the rule changes, and it just like kind of setting up to be a really, really exciting year, a really kind of unique year in the sense that we are going to see different teams. We're going to see different strategies, and I think that can only contribute to making it a more fun game. So yeah, really looking forward to it, and yeah, looking forward to be back recording the pod again when the season starts.
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, no, thanks again for joining me on this opening pod of the season. And just as another reminder, if you haven't already, make sure you do join the mini league for the podcast. The code again for you to join is ORDVAG for the head-to-head mini league, ORDVAG. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Have a great kind of tinkering session once again, once you click off this pod. But thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.